unbelievable pain, you will be able to say, hey.
I'm Bindi Irwin, and I'm so proud to stand with the Climate Aid World Forum and support them in their mission to help influence global change for climate sustainability.
If you grew up watching The Crocodile Hunter, then Bindi Irwin is probably someone you feel like you've known your entire life. She wasn't just another celebrity kid popping up occasionally on screen. She was right there in the middle of it all, smiling, fearless, and completely at home around animals that most people wouldn't dare get close to. From the outside, her life has always looked like this perfect blend of adventure, purpose, and happiness. But recently, people have been talking about Bindi for a very different reason. Not because of a new show, not because of a big wildlife moment, but because of a transformation that no one really saw coming. And when people say transformation, it's easy to assume they're talking about something physical. Maybe a change in appearance, a new style, something you can point to in a photo and say, wow, that's different. But in Bindi's case, what's really got people paying attention goes so much deeper than that. This is about what she's been through, what she's been carrying quietly for years, and how she finally decided to open up about it in a way that has completely shifted how people see her. Now, before we get into that, let's rewind for a second and really understand where she comes from, because Bindi's story is not your typical one. She was born into a world that already felt larger than life. Her father was one of the most recognizable wildlife personalities on the planet, a man whose energy and passion made millions of people fall in love with animals. Her mother was just as dedicated, building a life centered around conservation and education. And Bindi, she stepped into that world almost effortlessly. She didn't grow up with a normal routine. There were no typical school days followed by homework at the kitchen table. Instead, her classroom was surrounded by animals, her lessons often happening in the middle of real-life conservation work. She was homeschooled, which allowed her to balance education with everything else going on in her life. And from a very young age, she was already comfortable in front of a camera. By the time she was just a child, she had her own show. Not many kids can say that, and it wasn't just something small. It reached audiences all over the world. People connected with her instantly. She had this natural ability to communicate, to make people feel excited about wildlife, and to carry on the same kind of passion her father was known for. It didn't feel forced. It felt real. As she grew older, that connection only got stronger. She continued working in television, took on bigger projects, and proved that she wasn't just riding on her family's legacy. She was building something of her own. When she competed on a major dance competition show and ended up winning, it showed a completely different side of her. It wasn't about animals or conservation for once. It was about discipline, growth, and pushing herself in a totally new direction. At the same time, she never stepped away from her roots. She remained deeply involved in wildlife conservation, working alongside her family, and eventually stepping into leadership roles that carried a lot of responsibility. She became not just a public figure, but a voice for something bigger. Someone who could influence how people think about protecting the planet. On a personal level, things seemed just as full. She found love, got married, and became a mother. And from the outside, it really did look like she had built this life that was both meaningful and incredibly happy. The kind of life people admire. The kind of life that seems almost untouched by struggle. But here's the part that changes everything. While all of this was happening, the shows, the work, the family moments, Bindi was quietly dealing with something that was affecting her in ways no one could see. For years, she was living with constant pain. Not the kind you can easily brush off or ignore, but something that followed her every single day. Something that made even normal routines feel exhausting. And the hardest part wasn't just the pain itself, it was the fact that she didn't have answers. Imagine going through something like that for years, feeling like something is wrong, knowing it in your body, but not being able to explain it. Going from doctor to doctor, test after test, hoping that this time someone will finally figure it out. and instead being told that everything looks normal. Being told that maybe it's just something you have to deal with. Over time, that kind of experience can wear you down in ways that go far beyond physical discomfort. It starts to affect how you see yourself. You begin to question your own strength, your own instincts. You wonder if maybe you're overreacting, even when you know deep down that you're not. For Bindi, this went on for a long time. Years of pushing through, of showing up for work, for her family, for the public, while carrying something incredibly heavy behind the scenes. And because she's someone who has always been seen as strong and positive, there was this unspoken pressure to keep that image intact. She didn't talk about it publicly. She didn't make it part of her story. Instead, she kept going. And then, after all that time, everything finally started to make sense. She was diagnosed with a condition that affects millions of women around the world, yet is still widely misunderstood and often overlooked. Suddenly, there was a name for what she had been experiencing, a reason behind the pain that had been part of her life for so long. That moment, getting a diagnosis, can be incredibly powerful. Not because it immediately fixes everything, but because it validates what you've been feeling. It confirms that you weren't imagining it, that what you went through was real. For Bindi, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that involved treatment, surgery, and a long process of recovery. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was intense. She went through procedures that revealed just how much her body had been dealing with over the years. And even then, it wasn't a simple fix and move on situation. There were complications. There were moments that required even more medical attention. Times when things became serious in ways that couldn't be ignored. And through all of it, she kept showing up. Not just physically, but emotionally. What makes this part of her story so impactful isn't just what she went through. It's what she chose to do next. Because instead of keeping it private, instead of moving on quietly, she decided to share it. She opened up about her experience in a way that was honest, vulnerable, and incredibly real. And when she did that, something shifted. People started paying attention, not just to her, but to the issue itself. Suddenly, there were thousands of others who saw themselves in her story. People who had been dealing with similar symptoms, similar frustrations, similar dismissals. And for many of them, hearing someone like Bindi speak openly about it made a huge difference. It created a sense of connection, a sense of validation. And that's where her transformation really begins to take shape. Because this isn't just about going from being unwell to healing. It's about going from silence to speaking out, from uncertainty to understanding, from feeling alone to helping others feel less alone. She took something deeply personal and turned it into something meaningful on a much larger scale. And that kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's built through everything she's been through, the years of not knowing, the emotional weight of being dismissed, the physical toll of ongoing pain, and the strength it took to finally face it all head-on. Today, when people talk about Bindi Irwin's transformation, they're not just talking about what they see. They're talking about what they understand now that they didn't before. They're talking about resilience. They're talking about growth. They're talking about someone who went through something incredibly difficult and chose to use that experience to make a difference. And the truth is, that kind of transformation doesn't always look dramatic on the surface. It's not always something you can capture in a single moment or a single image. It's something you feel when you hear the full story, when you realize what someone has been carrying and how far they've come. Bindi is still the same person in many ways. She still has that passion for wildlife, that connection to her family, that drive to keep pushing forward. But there's also something new there now. A deeper layer. A perspective that only comes from going through something challenging and coming out the other side. And maybe that's why this moment feels different. Because it's not just about admiration anymore. It's about understanding. It's about seeing someone not just as a public figure, but as a real person who has faced real struggles. And in a world where so much is filtered and polished, that kind of honesty stands out. So when people say that Bindi Irwin's transformation has everyone talking, they're not exaggerating, but it's not for the reasons you might expect. It's not just about change. It's about truth. And sometimes, that's the most powerful transformation of all. Now I want to hear from you. Did you expect this side of her story? Or does it change the way you see her?